Wang Lu is joining us today from Providence, Rhode Island. She was born in Xi'an, China in 1982, studied composition at Central Conservatory in Beijing, then at Columbia University in New York. She currently teaches at Brown University. She's about to have a new work premiered by Seattle Modern Orchestra. Wang Lu, it's great to chat with you. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you, Mike. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Take us through your formative years, if you could. You literally followed in the footsteps of the first great generation of Chinese composers like Tan Dun, Bright Sheng, and Chen Yi, going from Beijing to New York to join the musical avant-garde. What were the key experiences and all that?
Oh, that's a great question. I grew up in the 80s and 90s China, a generation after them. They're my parents' generation, born around 1950s, My dad used to be a Beijing opera professional, and my grandmother is a local Qing opera fanatic. I started playing the piano when I was almost 6 years old, 5 or 6, and that's when, as the only child of our generation, the only child policy, each family purchased an upright piano made in China for their children, because after Cultural Revolution, people believed in a diverse range of musical and art education, and in particular in the aesthetic training, piano plays a major part of it. And
that's quite a change from Bright Sheng's childhood when the Red Guards came to confiscate his family's piano.
Right. Oh, that's a total turnabout. So for my generation, most of us had a piano, and I started playing and was very making good progress. Then I started writing music when I was about 14.
That's interesting about your father and grandmother. And when I think of Xi'an, I think of history and tradition, ancient capital of China, walled city, terracotta warriors, and all that. How did your time at Beijing Conservatory compare with that?
I went to the Beijing Central Conservatory when I was 18. I left home. I have to say, a lot of the my path are kind of like I feel like it's predetermined by who, like all of us, like who you encounter. I met Chou Wen-cheng, who brought Tan Dun, Chen Yi, and Bright Sheng, those people of my previous generation, to America when I was a junior at the conservatory.
He taught at Columbia for many years, former assistant to Varese, the very first Chinese composer to come to the West and embrace the avant-garde.
Right.
Passed away in 2019.
Right. So he was a very significant mentor of mine, whom I met when I was, as I just said, at the Beijing Conservatory. Then I knew, okay, maybe I could think about, going to America. But actually before that, who planted the seed in my mind was when I was a freshman. I ran into an American composer whose name is Eli Marshall, who's a grandnephew of Ned Rorem, just by chance.
Eli Marshall, who's at Cornell right now, but he spent a lot of time in China.
Right. And he told me more about American composers, Ned Rorem, Samuel Barber, and et cetera, and then told me about all the conservatories and universities. I started to learn English with him and hanging out and find out, the music scenes in Beijing, where it's not just conservatory centered, there's jazz, there's rock, there's everything else. There's the courtyard of Kunqu and Beijing Opera, performed by amateurs only for the inner circles. He introduced me to all of that musical life when I was a student. So the idea of coming to America, if I have to point to two people, these are really significant people. But coming to a Columbia University is quite a shift, and you have very interesting guests coming through. All the interesting things happen in the seminar. They train you to how to think critically, and you see people who are more mature and older than you. I came freshly out of undergrad, so I was the relatively younger one. They are not afraid of expressing their opinions and their emotion through the opinion, and a strong personality from all kinds of background.
Now, strong personality from all kinds of backgrounds, that could be a description of the piece we heard earlier, An Atlas of Time, specifically the piccolo trumpets movement, where we hear things combined in unexpected ways. Can you tell us about that piece?
Yeah, the Atlas of Time is a piece of multi-movement, and I use each movement to recall and reinvent a memory through sound and space. So the piccolo trumpet movement evokes a childhood memory of listening to radio broadcasting of children's stories from the state-run central radio station in China. Every night, it's my bedtime ritual to turn on the radio and listen to a story. And the opening credit was quoted in this movement. When you hear this sound, when I hear it, or people I know, my generation, we just, it's not just the stories, it's the sound from the streets, during the day. It's the more and more cars and buses in the street, more shops opening, more popular music and more classical concerts, and more people opening their businesses, and more buildings are built, infrastructures are built. All kinds of things are really dramatically shaping the urban lives in China. So those are behind my mind when I was writing that.
Now, as an American, when I hear music that juxtaposes different styles and sounds like that, modernism next to folk or popular music, I think of composers like Charles Ives and John Cage, even Sun Ra and Zappa and Zorn.
Yeah, definitely. I'm familiar with their work. But when I compose a piece, I try to focus on the subject matter. I try to do, like a research. So this is the subject I want to do, and this is, the message, and the influence would naturally come out. I wouldn't think, directly. But there's definitely no constraint in terms of like, how come you have all these, styles together? And also, I don't think I ever felt like I need an example that I've heard before to legitimize, like, okay, so you can do that because this happened in collage. Maybe this is John Zorn, So yeah, it was not a problem.
Now, we heard a second piece of yours a moment ago, Aftertouch, for flute and electronics. And although most of your music doesn't sound particularly Chinese to me, that last section of Aftertouch does remind me of the pitch bends and sparse rhythms of traditional Chinese flute music. And yet it's preceded by techno beats. What's that all about?
It's very interesting project because I thought writing for solo flute would not be as interesting as if this piece had a techno or dance element of it. As you're saying, interesting, nobody actually pointed out the ending is like a Chinese flute. And I was not thinking about Chinese flute. I was focusing on different beats and, the spinning disc and the spinning dance floor. And for the pitch bending and the lower flute, there's just a moment of almost elevated from the floor. And also, since it's a slower music, I really hoped there's a space to use a subwoofer in the real venue, which I never got to experience as a teenager.
You didn't have anything like Musica or Danceteria in Xi'an?
I was a very good student. I never really, quote unquote, hang out or have a lot of fun. So
I see.
So I'm making it up in making this piece.
We're speaking with Wang Lu, who is joining us from Providence, Rhode Island via Zoom. She'll be here in the Northwest for the premiere of The Nothing Man and Other Tales, a new commission from Seattle Modern Orchestra. Performance is Saturday, June 3rd at 8 p.m. at Town Hall in Seattle. Tickets and information are at seattlemodernorchestra.org. Lou, what should we know about this brand new piece?
Yeah, this new piece takes its material. The text is from this beautiful collection called The Telephone Tales.
That's from Gianni Rodari.
Yeah, Gianni Rodari. I read this collection to my own daughter, who's 4.5 now. So I'm very familiar with this book, and so when I got the opportunity to work with Seattle Modern Orchestra through a Barlow Foundation commission, I immediately thought it because it's already like in my system.
Mm-hmm.
And I love the fact that each story has to be told within a payphone token.
Because the narrator is a traveling salesman who promises his child a nightly bedtime story, which he delivers from payphones.
Right. So that's already, something resonates with me. I grew up when I was an undergraduate in Beijing, I still used a payphone.
Uh-huh.
And I love the aspect of storytelling focused on listening, but not watching. And also because they are so fantastical, it opens up, as you're saying, like collage of musical styles.
There are lots of stories in Rodari's book, and I think you only said a few of them. Which
Yes.
Which one is your favorite?
Yeah, well, I chose one of them is called The Nothing Man. So in that story, there's nothing. Yeah, there's nothing man goes on the nothing road, has nothing nose, nothing mouth, nothing head, runs into nothing mouth. And it's just, when I first read it, I thought my 4-year-old would just stop me and saying, no, this doesn't make any sense. But this turned out to be her favorite story. And I started to worry, maybe she already figured out the existential crisis we all face. What is the point of doing a lot of things?
Now, you wrote this for Maria Manister,
Yes.
who is the Northwest's go-to soprano for new music. She just performed Kate Soper's It's a Dixit with Seattle Modern Orchestra. And she also does a lot of Finnish language music.
Yes. When I talked to Maria at the beginning of the project, she told me she sings in different styles. And I was very fascinated. I had a colleague, a composer, Sampo Hapamonkey, who spent the Columbia time with me, who was Finnish. We would hang out, and he would imitate the speech contour of Chinese, and I would do the same for Finnish. And we find it very interesting because we're both at the beginning very lost at what is going on in American university. And they found each other. We had this bond. So when I found like she's Finnish, suddenly I just thought about all the potentials of communicating without even understanding the words. Although the words are said by the writer, I did find places to just take off from the words. Some syllabus, sometimes just music, and voice is used as an instrument. And also because she sings Finnish folk music, that's what she told me. Mm-hmm. And I imagined the different styles in singing, maybe with speech or sometimes, different positions. I'm curious to really explore.
You mentioned Sampo Hapamäki, the young Finnish composer. A few years ago, I played a piece on the radio that he wrote for Harry Parch Instruments for the ensemble Music Fabric in Cologne, which has a complete set of replica Parch instruments. And the original instruments are currently based here in Seattle. And one of the key performers in our own Harry Parch ensemble is Bonnie Whiting, who is the percussionist for Seattle Modern Orchestra.
Yeah, she's really stunning, her musicianship and how she controls time and transitions. We are working on something just for her.
Is that a separate piece?
Yeah, that's going to be a separate piece where we're using some percussion solfege from different Chinese opera and children's story. We're trying to find a space there. Yeah.
Interesting. And Bonnie has made a specialty of performing works for talking percussionist. We heard her on this program doing Globocar's Touché, which was the first talking percussionist piece.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you will be adding to that tradition in the very near future.
Yes.
My guest is Wang Lu, speaking to us from Providence, Rhode Island, by way of Xi'an, China. Her new work is a setting of Gianni Rodari's children's book, The Telephone Tales, and it will be premiered by Seattle Modern Orchestra on Saturday, June 3rd at 8 p.m. at Town Hall, Seattle. You can go to townhallseattle.org or seattlemodernorchestra.org for tickets and information, and I'll see you there. And unfortunately, since it is a brand new piece, we don't have a recording of it, but we do have time for one more movement from An Atlas of Time. It's called Caravaggio's Descent. It's for 19 musicians and tape. Would you like to introduce it?
Sure. Caravaggio Descent was written after I lived in Rome on Janicolo Hill for a year. We see a lot of Caravaggio, and I thought about the music of Gesualdo. Both artists had quite violent life, and nature, but their arts are so striking. And I thought about how in Gesualdo's madrigals, triads are used with such beautiful motions, and the resonance evoke something so much ahead of his time. So I thought to, reflect that part of my experience living in Rome and getting to know the work.
Now, Caravaggio, as you alluded, was involved in numerous brawls over his life, and I believe some people think he might have been murdered. His contemporary Gesualdo was notorious for murdering his wife and her illicit lover, but he got away with it since he was a prince. And he left us some famous chromatic madrigals written around 1600, and we'll hear some of it in your piece, right?
You hear a bit of the chord progression.
From which madrigal?
I wouldn't say a specific madrigal, but
Okay.
I transcribe things and get the chords down, and then I shuffle them and then try to figure out, my own way. Yeah.
Well, that's classic postmodernism, isn't it? Looking back at old music while also looking ahead.
Yeah.
Wang Lu, it's been a delight. Thanks so much for chatting with us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Here is Caravaggio's Descent by Wang Lu.